Hello everyone. Tonight we will spend 24 hours in a medieval coal mine. And yes, it's exactly as delightful as it sounds, or rather not. Imagine stepping into a shadowy hole in the earth where the faint flicker of a rushlight barely pushes back the heavy, impenetrable darkness. Somewhere nearby, a dull tapping echoes faintly like the ghostly heartbeat of the mine itself, or perhaps a message from the so-called knockers that miners believed warned of lurking dangers. That odd, half-lit sound might make you wonder, what on earth am I getting myself into? Spoiler alert, you won't like the answer. Here's a playful warning before you get too cozy. Spending even one day underground in a medieval coal mine is a one-way ticket to misery, exhaustion, and a lung full of dust you'll never forget. Stick with me all the way through, because by the end you'll understand why enduring even 24 hours down there would be a heroic feat, if not outright impossible. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I'm doing here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see who joins these late-night journeys. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some gentle background noise, and let's get started tonight. You step cautiously through a narrow entrance carved crudely out of the earth, the wood beams overhead creaking ominously. The air inside is instantaneously heavier, a dense, humid mix of coal dust and something sharper, a sulphurous bite that clings to your throat. Your eyes strain against the gloom, but there's no relief. The faint glow of a rushlight fixed to a beam nearby barely outlines the jagged walls and low ceiling. The ground beneath your boots is uneven, slippery with mud and crushed rock. This is no leisurely stroll. It's more like entering the belly of a restless beast. Medieval coal mines were more labyrinth than tunnel-cramped and winding like the veins of some ancient creature. Every inch was gouged by hand with picks and shovels that showed the wear of relentless labor. There were no safety nets, no modern supports, just crude wooden beams groaning under the weight of the earth above their strength, a fragile hope against collapse. You imagine the miners who toiled here, stooped low backs, aching lungs filled with dust, and you wonder how they survived this subterranean nightmare at all. The low ceiling forces you to bend forward. Standing upright is a luxury reserved for only the rarest chambers. As you shuffle forward, a faint tapping sound drifts through the air, irregular, unsettling. Miners called these sounds the knockers, mysterious spirits believed to warn of impending danger like falling rocks or sudden floods. Some say the knocks were just the mine settling, but for the men underground, these sounds were ominous messages from the dark. Your heart quickens slightly, not exactly from fear, but from a sense that the mine is alive watching. Lighting was a constant challenge. Without modern lamps, miners relied on rushlights, thin reeds soaked in animal fat, barely producing a dim flame that cast long, flickering shadows. Sometimes a candle was used, but flames consumed precious oxygen and risked igniting explosive gases. The dim light forces you to depend on touch and memory, familiarizing yourself with the tunnels more by feel than sight. You sense the cold, damp stone pressing in on every side, the way the air tastes stale and thick with coal dust. This coal dust isn't just dirt. It's a choking presence, a constant irritation to eyes and lungs alike. Even now, your throat itches, your skin prickles with the fine black powder that settles like an unwanted cloak. For medieval miners, this was daily life working amid clouds of dust that would later be debated by scholars as a cause of early lung diseases, possibly precursors to what we know today as black lung. The idea that medieval societies understood these hazards remains contested. Some historians argue the dangers were known but ignored due to economic pressures. Others suggest ignorance prevailed with miners simply enduring as best they could. Your hands itch to touch the rough walls to feel the grainy coal beneath your fingertips, but you keep them close to your sides, wary of disturbing any loose stones. You hear the distant scrape of pickaxes against rock, the grunt of laboring men echoing faintly from deeper tunnels. It's a rhythmic, haunting sound, work and worry wrapped together in every strike. Even the entrance itself is a study in contradiction, a lifeline to the surface, yet also a trap. You catch the faint smell of sweat, damp leather, and something metallic old iron tools, perhaps abandoned helmets left behind in haste. The air is stale, recycled, barely moving. You swallow and try to ignore the feeling of claustrophobia creeping into your chest. Outside, the sun might be shining, birds singing, life continuing without care. But down here, time is measured by exhaustion and the flicker of failing flames. You picture the miners spending endless hours underground, not daring to stop lest they lose momentum or risk their lives. Theirs was a harsh, dangerous existence where every day was a gamble with fate. So here you are trapped in darkness and dust, a fleeting visitor to a world where survival depended on strength, skill, and a fair bit of superstition. You realize quickly that spending 24 hours in this mine isn't just about enduring the physical challenges, it's about confronting the primal fear of being buried alive, suffocated by your own labor. And yet, despite all this misery, medieval coal mining was essential. It powered forges, heated homes, and fed the growing cities that demanded more than wood could supply. Without these dark, dangerous tunnels and the men who risked everything inside them, the medieval world would have looked very different. So as you take a slow breath and prepare to go deeper, remember this is just the beginning. In the hours ahead, you'll learn how miners fought against the dust, the darkness, and the dangers, and why simply staying down here for a day would push anyone beyond their limits. The deeper you go, the thicker the air becomes, a dense soup of smells that curl into your nostrils and refuse to leave. It's not just the ordinary underground dampness. This place carries the sharp, biting tang of sulfur, that unmistakable hint of rotten eggs mixed with something acrid and metallic. You breathe it in cautiously, each inhalation a small rebellion against the choking atmosphere. Below the sulfur lurks another scent, less obvious but equally persistent, the salty, sour sweat of countless bodies pressed together in tight spaces, working beneath the Earth's surface where the sun will never reach. Sulfur is the mine's signature scent, a natural byproduct of coal deposits, especially when disturbed and exposed to air. It's a harsh chemical whisper that announces the mine's presence in your very breath. Miners knew it well. Some believed it to be a sign of the mine's dangerous moods, a warning that toxic gases like fire damp or methane were lurking nearby ready to ignite and turn the tunnels into a fiery tomb. The faintest spark, a careless flicker from a rushlight, could set the whole place ablaze. That dread risk hovered constantly invisible but deadly, forcing every miner to remain vigilant despite the exhaustion weighing down their limbs. The smell of sweat mingled with the sulfur is a quieter but no less important presence. Miners worked shoulder-to-shoulder backs bent in cramped postures for hours on end. Their bodies were natural furnaces radiating heat and moisture in the stifling tunnels. Sweat soaked their coarse woolen tunics and dripped down their necks, adding a salty tang to the already oppressive air. This odor wasn't just unpleasant. It was a constant reminder of the close, almost suffocating community underground. Privacy was a luxury no one enjoyed, and personal space was non-existent. This mingling of scents plays tricks on your senses. At times you might swear the sulfur is growing stronger, only to realize your nose is dry and sensitive from the dust. Or that the sweat has turned metallic, an echo of iron tools clanging nearby, or the faintest hint of blood a testament to the frequent cuts and bruises miners bore as part of their daily toll. Today, modern miners use sophisticated ventilation systems to push fresh air into tunnels and suck out dangerous gases. Back in medieval times, however, airflow was a mystery often left to luck, prayer, or crude engineering. Some mines dug multiple shafts, hoping fresh air would trickle in naturally. Others used smoky fires at the entrance to create drafts, though such fires risked igniting explosive gases. The success of these methods was wildly inconsistent, and sometimes fresh air was just a cruel illusion replaced quickly by stale, heavy breaths. You might wonder how the miners even tolerated this smell day after day. The truth is, they didn't have much choice. Their livelihoods depended on extracting coal to fuel homes and industries. Yet many also relied on folk remedies to keep the worst at bay, chewing on herbs, wearing cloth masks soaked in vinegar, or even carrying lucky charms to ward off sickness. None of these helped much against the relentless assault of dust and fumes, but they offered some psychological comfort. Scholars debate how much medieval societies understood about these health risks. Written records are sparse, and medical knowledge was rudimentary at best. Some chroniclers described miners suffering from miners' sickness, a condition that likely referred to respiratory diseases caused by coal dust inhalation. Others saw it as a vague decline or punishment from God, rather than an occupational hazard. This uncertainty hasn't stopped historians from arguing heatedly over the prevalence and recognition of lung diseases among medieval miners. Adding an odd twist to this grim environment is the fact that some medieval miners reportedly developed a strange tolerance for the sulfurous air. It's unclear whether this was a physiological adaptation or simply an example of stoic endurance, but it hints at the harshness of their everyday lives. Your nose, thankfully, hasn't adjusted yet, and each breath feels like a small betrayal. Beyond sulfur and sweat, the mine's air carries countless tiny particles of coal dust. These microscopic shards float invisibly, coating your lungs and skin like a fine black powder. Long-term exposure likely caused chronic coughing eye irritation and other ailments we now associate with coal mining. Yet the connection between coal dust and lung disease was not firmly established until centuries later, leaving medieval miners unaware of the invisible poison accumulating with every breath. Meanwhile, the sweat smell serves as a subtle social marker underground. It reminds you that you are not alone in this dark world. Miners often shared food tools and stories, their close quarters fostering a sense of camaraderie, even amid danger and misery. The mingling scents of sulfur and sweat thus become an olfactory soundtrack of solidarity and survival. As you press forward, the oppressive odor presses harder, and you might find yourself longing for the fresh, sweet air of the surface, the smell of rain on grass, wood smoke, or just the absence of chemical stings. Yet down here, those comforts are distant memories, almost like a fading dream. Your mind drifts momentarily to the curious juxtaposition of these harsh smells with some of the odd rituals miners practiced to cope with their grim environment. Some carried sprigs of herbs like rosemary or thyme to freshen the air, while others believed in spiritual protection from the mine's invisible dangers. It's a strange blend of primitive science and superstition, a medieval attempt to wrest some control over the uncontrollable. In this oppressive atmosphere, every breath becomes a small victory, a reminder that despite the sulfur sweat and dust, life continues down here in stubborn defiance. But it's also a warning. 24 hours in this mine means not just enduring darkness and danger, but inhaling this relentless mixture of odors that slowly wear away at body and spirit alike. You realize that beneath the medieval coal mine's brutal exterior lies a world of human resilience, superstition, and shared struggle, all trapped in the pungent air you now breathe. As you trudge deeper into the mine, your eyes adjusting to the gloom, your hands unconsciously reach out to steady yourself on rough, uneven rock walls. The tools here are as crude as the tunnels themselves, but they are the lifeblood of every miner's day. Imagine hefting an iron pick, a simple, heavy thing with a pointed tip on one end and a flat blade on the other. It's your hammer and chisel all in one, worn down by endless strikes against stubborn coal seams. The pick's weight becomes a constant companion, a relentless reminder that down here, brute force is everything. Alongside the pick, the shovel is your other indispensable friend. Far from the shiny garden spade you might picture, medieval mining shovels were heavy broad and often hastily forged. Their wooden shafts were prone to splintering, and the iron blades bent easily against the unforgiving rock. You imagine the miners gripping these tools with hands cracked and calloused, swinging and scraping in repetitive rhythms, every movement aching yet necessary. Tools didn't arrive in neat sets or with fancy cases. Miners often had to maintain and repair them underground, or bring broken tools back to the surface for blacksmiths to mend. The quality of your pick or shovel could mean the difference between a successful day and backbreaking failure. Since the mining trade was demanding and dangerous, cheap tools made the work harder, but better equipment was often too expensive for the common miner. This lack of technological advancement meant that every piece of coal extracted was a direct result of physical endurance and skill, not clever machinery. You might chuckle at the thought that the only automation was the steady pounding of a pick against rock, the grunting of men who literally had to break their backs to feed the fires of the medieval world. It's important to remember that mining picks and shovels weren't just tools. They were symbols of status and survival. In some mining communities, the shape and decoration of a pick's handle could indicate the owner's experience or rank. Miners took pride in their tools, sometimes carrying personalized engravings or charms, tiny tokens of luck, in an unforgiving trade. The day's work was dictated by the pick's rhythm strike, scrape, scrape, strike. Miners developed a muscle memory tuned to the harsh environment, their bodies adapting to the repetitive motion. But no amount of technique could fully protect them from exhaustion. Swinging a heavy iron pick in a confined space bent over or crouched is exhausting in a way few modern jobs can replicate. This grueling manual labor raises an interesting scholarly debate. How much did medieval miners rely on sheer physical strength versus specialized knowledge or technique? Some historians argue that many miners were skilled craftsmen who understood rock formations and used precise strikes to maximize coal yield. Others suggest that the work was largely brute force with little scientific understanding of geology, leading to dangerous and inefficient mining practices. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, shaped by centuries of trial error and shared experience. Alongside picks and shovels, miners sometimes used wedges and hammers to split coal seams. Wooden wedges, soaked in water to expand and crack rock, were a clever, if rudimentary, innovation that eased some of the strain. It's a reminder that while medieval mining was primitive compared to modern standards, it was not devoid of ingenuity. Here's a strange fact to lighten the mood: medieval miners occasionally decorated their tools with small bells or tokens believed to ward off knockers, the mischievous spirits said to haunt mines. The jingling was thought to confuse or appease these creatures, reducing accidents. Imagine the grim faces of exhausted miners, bell on, pick half, hoping it worked, half convinced it was just superstition. Despite all the hardship, tools connected miners to a shared culture and identity. They were essential for extracting coal that fueled blacksmiths' forges, heated homes, and powered industries far beyond the mine's dark entrance. Without these picks and shovels, the medieval economy would grind to a halt. So, as you heft your imagined pick and scrape at the stubborn coal seam, remember, this every swing is a small battle against the earth, an act of persistence that kept entire societies warm and alive. But it also comes with a price: the sweat, the blisters, and the slow grinding wear on the body that no tool could ever fully ease. You start to appreciate why spending even a few hours wielding these tools underground would wear down the strongest person. Imagine doing it for a full 24 hours with little rest, poor lighting, and the ever-present danger lurking in the dark. The medieval coal miner's day was shaped by these humble tools and the fierce determination to keep swinging. There was no quitting, no shortcuts. Just you, your pick, and the relentless rock beneath your feet. The day stretches on, and with it the grim realization settles deeper bread once the humble staple of your daily meals has become as rare and precious as gold. You walk toward the village's small bakehouse, a stone building with a blackened chimney that still manages to puff out a faint wisp of smoke. It's one of the few places where the smell of warmth briefly replaces the damp rot that clings everywhere else. But even here, the atmosphere is tense, the usual jovial chatter replaced by hushed voices and worried glances. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of smoke and stale flour, but the ovens work at half capacity, and the supply of grain is pitifully small. You watch as the village baker shapes tiny loaves, their crusts thin and pale, lacking the golden hue of better days. These loaves will barely fill a child's belly, let alone an adult's. The grain is ground finer than usual, almost to dust, just to stretch what little there is. Every crumb is fought over. You recall that bread has always been more than just food. It's been a symbol of life, of community. Yet now it feels like a symbol of everything slipping away. The phrase breaking bread sounds like a cruel joke when the loaf is so small it might break before it even reaches your hands. Across the village, the market square offers little relief. Merchants bring in small quantities of barley and rye, but the prices have soared beyond what most peasants can afford. Barter has replaced coin for many, and even then, trades are fraught with suspicion. You overhear whispers of people pawning tools, clothing, and even family heirlooms in desperate attempts to buy food. The social fabric is fraying under the strain of hunger and fear. You remember a quirky detail from a dusty old manuscript during times like this. Some peasants resorted to grinding acorns or even dried leaves to bake into their bread. It might sound like a medieval version of a diet fad gone wrong, but for them it was a grim necessity. The taste was bitter, the texture harsh, but it filled the stomach if only briefly. You watch a mother cradle her child, her arms trembling as she breaks a small piece of bread in two. Her eyes are tired but fierce. determined to give her child what she can't have herself. It's a scene repeated countless times across villages like yours, a testament to human resilience amid despair. The scarcity of bread also sparks a slow, simmering anger among the villagers. You hear murmurs of resentment not just toward the weather or the land, but toward those who seem untouched by the famine's bite. Nobles and clergy, who still enjoy ample food, become targets of quiet accusations and bitterness. This growing tension threatens to fracture an already fragile community. Historians debate how much the famine contributed to social unrest in the years that followed. Some argue that these early hardships sowed seeds of rebellion and change, while others see them as moments that exposed existing inequalities rather than created new ones. For you living through it, the lines between survival and revolt blur under the shadow of hunger. The bakery's oven groans, and a faint warmth brushes your face as a batch of loaves is pulled from the fire. You reach out instinctively, the smell tempting, but the knowledge bitter. One loaf might feed a family for a day, or barely one person. Sharing becomes an act of both charity and sacrifice, and no one knows how long it can last. Your stomach growls louder than you'd like to admit a sharp reminder of your own emptiness. You think about the fields outside the village, soaked and barren, the rotting crops that never made it to harvest. The wet has stolen more than just food. It's stolen your security and your peace of mind. You wander back toward the center of the village, passing families gathered around their meager fires, clutching what little food they have. The air hums with quiet desperation and fading hope. You wonder how many more mornings will begin like this, with cold, wet clothes, empty stomachs, and the gnawing fear that there might be nothing left tomorrow. A child runs past, clutching a hard piece of bread, the crust so tough it could chip a tooth. You smile faintly, trying to hold on to some warmth amid the chill. This famine has changed everything: the fields, the food, the people. But it has not yet extinguished the flicker of life within. You trudge onward, deeper into the maze of tunnels carved slowly and painfully by hand. Imagine walls scraped and hacked by iron picks, uneven floors scarred by thousands of footsteps, and ceilings low enough to force you into a permanent stoop. These tunnels weren't just pathways. They were lifelines, painstakingly excavated by countless miners who trusted in their strength and a good dose of hope. Every inch of this underground labyrinth was carved without the aid of explosives or machinery. Instead, men hammered away at rock and coal with sheer willpower and rudimentary tools. The process was slow, backbreaking, and relentless. Miners aimed to follow the coal seams, twisting and turning to chase veins that could suddenly disappear or narrow to impossible thinness. This made navigation a nightmare, with corridors branching unpredictably into dead ends or unstable cavities. Safety was more a matter of luck than design. Wooden supports held up by nails and wedges sometimes kept ceilings from collapsing, but these were crude and often insufficient. The mine was a breathing, shifting thing. Earth moved, water seeped, and timbers rotted. At any moment, the ground above could give way, sending tons of rock crashing down without warning. You feel the tension build as you step carefully, aware that the tunnel's stability is as fragile as a whispered promise. In many ways, these tunnels were physical manifestations of hope, a belief that if you kept digging, you'd strike a rich vein of coal. That hope sustained miners through long, dark shifts filled with exhaustion and danger. It was a gamble, with each strike of the pick potentially opening a pathway to survival or disaster. This reality has sparked scholarly debates on mining techniques and safety measures in medieval times. Some historians argue that miners had surprisingly sophisticated knowledge of geology and tunneling methods honed through generations of experience. Others maintain that mining was mostly trial and error, with poor understanding of structural risks leading to frequent accidents. The truth probably lay somewhere in between a mix of inherited wisdom, folk knowledge, and desperate experimentation. A strange fact breaks the bleak monotony. Some tunnels were decorated with crude carvings or symbols believed to ward off evil or bring good luck. These miners' graffiti scratched into the walls reveal a surprising glimpse of the human spirit thriving amid hardship. Sometimes simple crosses, other times indecipherable marks. They were silent prayers for protection in a world where survival was never guaranteed. The construction of tunnels demanded a kind of dance with danger. Every strike of the pick risked loosening dangerous stones. Every step might stumble into a hidden pit or waterlogged cavity. The ever-present threat of flooding added another layer of menace as underground rivers or rainwater could quickly fill a tunnel, trapping miners in cold, dark, drowning hazards. Despite these risks, the tunnels were vital arteries for the medieval world's growing demand for coal. Cities expanded, fires burned longer, and blacksmiths hammered out tools and weapons, all fueled by the fuel carried out of these claustrophobic passages. Without this underground network, progress as medieval society knew it would have ground to a halt. Living with these constant threats shaped the mindset of miners. Superstitions flourished, and communal bonds strengthened. Many miners believed that the mine was alive, and that spirits or knockers communicated warnings through knocks or rattles. This belief created a shared culture of respect and fear, influencing how miners worked and interacted with the environment. You start to grasp why spending a full day in this maze would wear down even the strongest mind. The tunnel's endless twists, the creaking timbers overhead, the unpredictable dangers lurking just out of sight. They create a psychological pressure as heavy as the earth itself. In this unforgiving world built by hand and hope, miners carved not just coal, but survival itself. One strike, one step, one breath at a time. As you pause briefly in a slightly wider tunnel, the reality of the mine's importance sinks in. Despite the darkness and danger, coal mining was a vital economic engine powering medieval society. Far beyond these claustrophobic tunnels, the coal extracted here warmed homes, fired blacksmith forges, and fed the growing needs of towns and cities. You're standing not just in dirt and rock, but in the foundation of medieval industry and urban life. Coal's role was transformative. Before coal's rise, wood was the primary fuel for heating and metalworking. But deforestation and the limits of timber supply pushed societies to seek alternatives. Coal's abundance made it an attractive option, even if mining it was arduous and perilous. This shift helped medieval economies expand with coal-fueling industries that relied on heat, everything from glassmaking to baking to brewing. The very fabric of everyday life, from cooking fires to crafted metal tools, depended on this black mineral. The miners you imagined earlier were not just laborers. They were critical cogs in a larger machine of economic growth. Towns grew around mines, and trade routes formed to transport coal to markets. The demand created jobs beyond the pits: cart drivers, blacksmiths, merchants, and more. This interconnected web of commerce helped shape medieval society's trajectory. Yet the profitability of coal mining came at a steep human cost. Miners worked long hours under brutal conditions, often paid poorly despite the essential nature of their labor. The wealth generated rarely trickled down to those who risked their lives daily underground. This imbalance sparked tensions, occasional strikes, and sometimes violent disputes, early echoes of labor struggles that would echo for centuries. Historians debate how well medieval authorities regulated mining operations. Some argue that local lords and guilds imposed strict rules to protect workers and ensure fair distribution of resources. Others claim regulations were lax or ignored, prioritizing profit over safety. Records from the period are patchy, but it's clear that mining was a contested and complicated economic endeavor, balancing risk-reward and human cost. Here's an odd fact that underscores the mine's wider influence. Coal was occasionally used as a form of currency or payment in mining communities. Because it was so valuable, miners sometimes accepted coal instead of coins or barter goods. Imagine lugging bags of black rock home as your paycheck, hardly the cash you'd prefer, but valuable nonetheless. The economic importance of coal also affected medieval politics. Control over coal mines could grant a lord or city significant power, wealth, and influence. Some mining regions became fiercely contested with rival factions vying for control of rich seams. These disputes sometimes erupted into skirmishes or drawn-out legal battles, revealing how intertwined coal was with status and power. Coal mining towns often faced unique challenges due to their economic roles. Rapid population growth strained resources, leading to overcrowding, poor sanitation, and health crises. The black dust wasn't confined to the mines. It settled on homes and streets, contributing to an unhealthy environment. Yet these communities endured, driven by the promise of work and livelihood. You might find it surprising that medieval coal mining helped fuel technological innovation as well. The availability of a steady fuel source enabled blacksmiths to produce better tools and weapons, which in turn influenced warfare and craftsmanship. This feedback loop between mining and technology highlights the mine's unseen yet critical role in medieval progress. Spending 24 hours here, you sense the weight of this economic engine pressing down as heavily as the earth overhead. Every swing of the pick, every shovelful of coal ripples outward to warm hearths, forge swords, and build cities. The mine's dark veins carried not just minerals, but the lifeblood of medieval civilization. Yet, beneath this grand economic story lies the gritty human reality of miners, who bore the burden, often unseen and underappreciated, of powering this world. Their labor was indispensable, but their lives were fragile, shadowed by danger, illness, and poverty. So as you catch your breath in this tunnel, remember the coal beneath your feet fueled more than fires. It powered dreams, ambitions, and the very shape of medieval society. You feel a scratchy tickle deep in your throat, a persistent reminder that the mine is not just a physical challenge, but a health hazard. Coal dust swirls invisibly in the air, a silent enemy invading lungs with every breath. Today, we understand the risks well. Black lung disease and respiratory illnesses are well-documented occupational hazards. But back in medieval times, how much did anyone really know? Here lies one of the most debated questions among scholars. Did medieval societies recognize the health dangers miners faced, or were they simply resigned to the harsh conditions? Some historians argue that early miners and their communities understood the risks intuitively. Chronic coughing and fatigue were common complaints, and folk remedies abounded. Others suggest that the connection between coal dust and disease was unclear, and miners were often blamed for their ailments, or the symptoms were attributed to divine punishment or general frailty. Medical knowledge was limited, and miners were among the least privileged, often excluded from formal health care. This lack of understanding meant many suffered in silence, their illnesses worsening without effective treatment. Some mining towns had rudimentary systems for caring for the sick, but these were inconsistent and underfunded. Miners' diets, already meager and monotonous, did little to support their health. Frequent exposure to cold, damp conditions combined with poor nutrition made them vulnerable to respiratory infections and other illnesses. Yet, despite this, miners showed remarkable resilience. You might wonder how much of their survival was due to physical toughness versus sheer necessity. There was little alternative but to endure. A strange fact that often surprises listeners: some medieval miners reportedly used tobacco or other herbs to soothe coughing and clear their lungs long before tobacco's wider introduction to Europe. Whether these treatments helped or harmed is unclear, but they reveal an early attempt to self-manage mining-related ailments. The debate also extends to the social response. Were mining communities aware enough to push for better working conditions? Evidence is mixed. Some towns implemented basic ventilation shafts and timber supports indicating concern for safety and health. Others seem to have accepted high mortality and morbidity rates as inevitable. Interestingly, some mining guilds and local authorities issued regulations intended to protect workers, at least on paper. These often included rules about shift lengths, tool maintenance, and tunnel inspections. But enforcement was spotty, and economic pressures frequently overrode safety concerns. The miner's health was often sacrificed for productivity. The chronic cough and labored breathing many miners experienced were called miner's asthma, or simply miner's sickness. While symptoms resemble what modern medicine identifies as pneumoconiosis or chronic bronchitis, medieval descriptions were vague and sometimes mystical. The lack of diagnostic tools meant miners' diseases were poorly understood, fueling superstition and stigma. Your own throat itches as you imagine the cumulative damage of dust inhaled day after day. The fact that many miners died young or were crippled by respiratory illness speaks to the grim reality beneath the economic success of coal mining. Despite the dangers, miners and their families depended on this work for survival, creating a tragic tension between necessity and health. It's a stark reminder that progress often comes with unseen costs borne by the laboring class. So, as you catch your breath in this stifling tunnel, consider the invisible enemy swirling around you, the coal dust that no lamp can illuminate yet, which silently erodes the lives of those who brave this underground world. The constant knocking echoing through these dark tunnels isn't just the mine settling, it's the voices of knockers, or so the miners believed. You might laugh at the idea of tiny underground spirits tapping on walls, but in a place where danger lurked in every shadow, such beliefs weren't mere folklore. They were survival tools. Miners' superstitions were a complex mix of fear, hope, and attempts to explain the inexplicable. The knockers were thought to warn of impending collapses or flooding by knocking or tapping sounds. Sometimes, miners left offerings, pieces of bread, or small tokens in tunnels to appease these spirits, hoping for protection. You can almost imagine a weary miner pausing to listen, straining to decipher whether a knock is a warning or just a trick of the ear. This belief system offered comfort in a perilous environment. It transformed randomness and danger into a predictable, if mysterious, pattern. The knocking was not just noise. It was communication, a way to stay connected to the mine's living presence. Historians debate how seriously miners took these superstitions. Some argue that these beliefs were deeply ingrained and influenced daily work practices, even dictating when and how miners entered dangerous areas. Others suggest they were more casual traditions, stories told to lighten the mood or bond the group. Regardless, these ideas shaped the social fabric of mining communities. Beyond the knockers, miners believed in protective charms and rituals. Some wore talismans or carried iron objects to ward off evil. Others recited prayers or performed small rituals before descending. These customs created a shared sense of safety and control in an uncontrollable environment. An odd, unrelated fact in some regions, miners believed that encountering a bat underground was a good omen, symbolizing protection and guidance through darkness. Conversely, spotting a rat was seen as a bad sign heralding misfortune or collapse. You might chuckle at how such beliefs mirror modern superstitions about black cats or broken mirrors. These superstitions also served a practical purpose. Listening for knocks made miners more alert to structural changes, while rituals fostered community cohesion and psychological resilience. In a profession where anxiety could be paralyzing, these beliefs provided a coping mechanism. You can imagine the mix of skepticism and faith among miners. Some might have secretly doubted the spirits but played along to maintain group morale. Others were deeply convinced, interpreting every sound and shadow through the lens of these beliefs. The mine was more than a physical space. It was a spiritual battleground where unseen forces were as feared as falling rocks. The presence of knockers and other spirits reminded miners that survival depended not just on strength and skill, but also on respect for the mine's mysterious power. So, as you listen closely in the darkness, wondering if that tap is real or imagined, remember that these superstitions were a vital thread in the fabric of medieval mining life, blending fear, hope, and humanity in the depths below. You might imagine the medieval coal miner's day as a brief, sharp burst of labor. But no, it was a marathon. Long before clocks governed modern work schedules, miners endured grueling shifts, often stretching well beyond 12 hours, submerged in darkness and dust. The relentless rhythm of pick on stone was the soundtrack of their lives, punctuated only by brief, weary pauses to gulp water or catch a breath. These extended hours weren't just about productivity, they were about survival. The demand for coal was unyielding with winter's chill and the constant need for forged tools, pushing miners to their physical and mental limits. Days blurred into nights underground with little distinction between the two, since sunlight was an unreachable luxury. Endurance was key. The mine's oppressive heat, combined with dampness and poor ventilation, drained energy quickly. Your muscles ache from holding awkward postures, your lungs burn from the dust, and your eyes strain against flickering candlelight. It's no wonder miners developed a reputation for toughness and stubbornness. They had to. Historians debate whether these long hours were strictly enforced or more flexible based on conditions and local customs. Some records suggest that miners worked in shifts or watches rotating to reduce fatigue. Others imply that economic pressures and lack of regulation often forced miners into back-to-back exhausting labor. The truth is probably a mix of harsh necessity and attempts at practical scheduling. An unusual fact, in some mining regions, miners sang songs or chanted rhythms to keep pace and morale during long hours. These communal songs helped synchronize work, relieve monotony, and foster a sense of camaraderie. It's a reminder that even in brutal conditions, human spirit found ways to endure and connect. Breaks were scarce and brief. Food was often eaten quickly, if at all consisting of salty bread or dried meat that barely sustained the body. The idea of a comfortable lunch break or rest area was a fantasy. You'd likely eat standing hands, still stained black lungs, still heavy with dust. The psychological toll of such long hours underground was immense. Isolation, darkness, and the constant threat of danger wore on mental health. You imagine the creeping feelings of claustrophobia and despair, quelled only by sheer determination or superstition. The hours blurred, the walls seemed to close in, and hope became a fragile thread. Despite this, the miners knew their work was essential. Each hour spent in the mine was a contribution to the wider community's survival and progress. This sense of purpose, however bleak, was a powerful motivator. You start to understand why spending 24 hours here isn't just about physical endurance. It's a mental trial as well. The endless shift, the grinding monotony, the ever-present risk, these combined to push anyone to their breaking point. As you steel yourself to imagine the coming hours, remember that medieval coal miners' days were measured not in minutes, but in unyielding endurance perseverance, and the quiet courage to face the darkness again and again. You might picture the medieval coal mine as a realm reserved for hardened adults, but in reality, children were a common and unfortunate presence here. Small hands and nimble bodies were pressed into service performing lighter yet still hazardous tasks in the cramped tunnels. Their youth offered no shield against the harsh conditions, and their role remains a troubling debated aspect of mining history. Children, as young as 6 or 7, were known to work underground, often acting as trappers who managed ventilation doors or carried small loads of coal to surface areas. Their duties, while less physically demanding than wielding picks, still exposed them to dust darkness and dangers that would challenge even seasoned adults. You imagine a child, barely taller than a miner's knee, navigating the twisting tunnels, a flickering rushlight barely illuminating their path. Historians argue over how widespread child labor was, and whether it was always a necessity, or sometimes a choice born of poverty. Some suggest that mining families depended on the combined earnings of all members, with children's wages, however small, crucial for survival. Others point to legal restrictions in later medieval periods that attempted to limit or regulate child labor, indicating societal concern. Yet enforcement was often lax, and economic pressure prevailed. The health risks for these young miners were severe. Exposure to coal dust damp conditions and physical strain during developmental years had long-lasting effects. Respiratory diseases, stunted growth, and frequent injuries were common. The psychological impact of working in such confined, dangerous spaces also raises questions about childhood trauma, though historical records are understandably limited on this topic. An odd fact, some mining communities had unique rituals for children entering the mines. For the first time, simple ceremonies or blessings intended to protect them from knockers and other spirits. These rituals combined superstition with a grim recognition of the dangers these children faced daily. Child miners also contributed to the social fabric of mining communities. Their presence fostered tight-knit families and apprenticeships, passing down mining skills from generation to generation. In some ways, working underground was a harsh form of early education, binding children into the collective struggle of their families and neighbors. Despite their contributions, child miners were among the most vulnerable. Their small size made them susceptible to accidents and exploitation. Some were pulled from the mines as public awareness and regulation improved, but not before many had endured years of hardship. The debate over child labor in medieval mines isn't just about economics or health. It also touches on evolving ideas about childhood and human rights. What we see as unacceptable today was often viewed differently in a world where survival took precedence over individual welfare. As you imagine the flickering shadows cast on the walls by a child miner's rushlight, it's hard not to feel a pang of sympathy. These children carried the weight of their family's hopes and the mine's dangers all in a world that demanded endurance over innocence. So, spending 24 hours underground means sharing space with these young laborers experiencing a reality where childhood was curtailed, and survival was a daily communal challenge. It's a sobering reminder of the human cost behind every shovelful of coal pulled from the dark. You rub your eyes as a fine, black powder settles on your skin, clinging stubbornly to every surface. This is coal dust, the ubiquitous invisible menace that coats the mine like an unwelcome guest who refuses to leave. It's not just dirt, it's a persistent hazard that seeps into your lungs, skin, and clothes, marking every moment spent underground. Coal dust is the mine's silent enemy. It floats through the stale air in microscopic particles so small that you don't see it until it's too late. Inhaling it day after day leads to chronic respiratory problems, a reality that medieval miners endured without fully understanding the cause. The dust irritates the lungs, triggering coughing fits, and over time can lead to a disease now known as pneumoconiosis, or black lung. Miners knew the cough; it was called miner's asthma, or the Black Death in grim whispers. The dust also infiltrated every part of miners' lives. It settled on their clothing, turning fabrics as black as night. Washing was a luxury. Miners often wore the same dusty clothes for weeks. Their skin bore the telltale grime, and eyes frequently reddened and stung from constant exposure. You can almost taste the dust in the air, a gritty, acrid tang that lingers long after leaving the mine. This harsh reality made the working environment not just physically taxing, but profoundly unhealthy. Coal dust was implicated in shortened lifespans and chronic illnesses among miners, casting a shadow over the vital economic role they played. The debate among historians and medical scholars continues on exactly how much medieval miners suffered from these ailments, given limited medical records. But there is little doubt the impact was severe. An unexpected fact, some mining communities tried to reduce dust exposure by wetting tunnel floors or walls, a crude early form of dust control. While this helped somewhat, it also increased humidity, making conditions even more uncomfortable and potentially fostering mold and other respiratory irritants. Dust was also a hazard for explosions. Fine coal dust suspended in air can ignite with devastating force. Without modern dust suppression systems, mines were tinderboxes waiting for a spark. This threat added to the constant anxiety underground, where even a small mistake could cause catastrophe. The pervasive presence of coal dust shaped miners' daily habits. Many avoided eating or drinking underground to prevent ingesting dust. After shifts, they often rinsed their mouths or gargled with water or vinegar to clear their throats, rituals that brought momentary relief. Socially, the dust marked miners as a distinct class, their bodies and clothes telling stories of hardship to anyone who saw them. This coal dust identity fostered solidarity among workers, but also reinforced their marginalization in wider society. They were essential, yet visibly marked by their labor's harshness. You might wonder how anyone could endure such relentless exposure. The answer lies partly in necessity and partly in resilience. Miners accepted the dust as part of life-developing routines and small comforts to cope. Humor, superstition, and community helped cushion the physical toll. As you imagine the fine, black powder settling on your skin and lungs, you realize that spending even a day in the mine means becoming coated not just in coal, but in the invisible residue of centuries of sacrifice and endurance. Emerging briefly from the suffocating depths, you find yourself in a mining village, clinging to the earth's edge. Black dust swirling in the air like a grim fog. These settlements grew quickly around mines, attracting families eager for work, but also inheriting the mine's grime and hardship. The village feels like an extension of the underground world, dark, cramped, and overshadowed by constant labor. The coal mine was the village's lifeblood and its curse. Jobs brought hope and income, but poor sanitation, overcrowding, and pollution created unhealthy living conditions. Chimneys belched smoke, and soot blanketed roofs and streets. Wells were often contaminated by runoff spreading disease. You can imagine the stale smells mixing with coal dust and refuse a pungent cocktail residents endured daily. Life here was precarious. Children played amid rubble and waste their laughter, a fragile counterpoint to the ever-present grime. Houses were tightly packed, built from cheap materials, and offered little protection from the elements. Disease outbreaks, including respiratory infections and tuberculosis, were common and deadly. Access to medical care was limited and often too costly for the average miner's family. Economically, these villages were dependent on the mine's fortunes. When coal seams ran low or accidents halted production, hardship followed swiftly. Families faced hunger and poverty, relying on communal charity or seasonal work to survive. Social tensions occasionally flared, fueled by wage disputes or perceived neglect by mine owners and local authorities. Historians debate the extent to which mining villages had organized governance or communal support systems. Some argue that early forms of worker guilds or local councils helped manage disputes and provide aid. Others suggest that these communities were largely fragmented, struggling under neglect and exploitation. The truth likely varies by region, reflecting diverse social dynamics. A strange fact, in some mining villages, residents developed unique folk dances and songs celebrating their shared identity and resilience. These cultural expressions became vital outlets for stress relief and communal bonding, preserving a sense of humanity amid hardship. Environmental damage was another consequence. Coal mining polluted local water sources and stripped vegetation, affecting agriculture and wildlife. Villagers lived with the daily consequences of environmental degradation that would not be fully understood for centuries. Despite these hardships, mining villages were vibrant communities. Markets, taverns, and churches flourished alongside the pits. Miners' families shared stories, recipes, and rituals, creating rich traditions rooted in their shared experience. The village was both a refuge and a reminder of the mine's demands. Spending 24 hours underground means understanding that the mine's influence stretches beyond tunnels. It shapes the very lives of those above, binding them in a network of dependence and endurance. The coal dust isn't just underground. It settles on the village, on clothes, skin, and hope. You realize that the mine's shadow is long and dark, touching every corner of these villages, making survival a collective challenge as much as an individual one. The ground beneath you feels unsteady, a subtle reminder that the mine is a living, shifting entity. Every step carries the risk of collapse, and lurking water threatens sudden flooding. These dangers were grim constants in the life of a medieval miner, shaping their routines and fears alike. Tunnel collapses were perhaps the most feared accidents. Without modern engineering, wooden supports could fail or rot, leaving vast chambers vulnerable to cave-ins. The sound of creaking beams and shifting stone was a nerve-wracking soundtrack to daily labor. Miners learned to read these signs moving quickly when the earth groaned, yet sometimes warnings came too late. Flooding was another lethal threat. Mines often intersected underground water sources or were vulnerable to heavy rain seeping through porous rock. A sudden influx could trap miners in submerged tunnels where escape was near impossible. Pumping technology was primitive, and draining flooded mines was a slow, dangerous process. Historians debate how often these accidents occurred and their fatality rates. Some records recount large-scale disasters that wiped out entire crews, while others suggest smaller, more frequent incidents. The lack of comprehensive records makes precise numbers elusive, but it's clear that mining was among the most hazardous medieval occupations. An odd fact, some mining communities developed rudimentary warning systems like hanging bells or knocking sequences to alert workers of collapses or floods. These early safety measures were crude, but showed a communal effort to survive. The psychological impact of these risks was profound. Miners worked under constant stress, aware that a single misstep or structural failure could mean death. This tension bred superstition and rituals designed to appease the mine's spirits, blending fear with hope. Your imagined 24 hours in the mine includes moments of intense vigilance when every sound might signal danger. The need to remain calm under pressure was vital. Panic could be fatal in such a confined environment. Despite these dangers, miners pressed on, driven by necessity and the demands of an economy reliant on coal. Their courage was quiet, born from resilience rather than glory. So, as you tread carefully, remember that the mine's perils were not abstract. They were immediate and deadly, shaping every breath and every strike of the pick. Survival was never guaranteed, making endurance a remarkable achievement in itself. You might have heard stories of miners carrying canaries into tunnels to detect toxic gases, a quaint, almost poetic image of delicate birds saving lives underground. However, this practice belongs to a later era beginning in the 19th century, long after the medieval coal mines were exploring. But medieval miners had their own less charming methods for sniffing out danger. Without canaries, miners relied on their senses and crude instruments to detect the presence of deadly gases like methane and carbon monoxide. They watched for changes in air quality, the flicker of flames, or the behavior of small animals brought underground. Mice, spiders, and even cats sometimes served as primitive warning systems. If an animal showed signs of distress or died, suddenly miners knew to evacuate quickly. Not exactly the most comforting method, but it was their best option. Historians debate the reliability and prevalence of these early detection methods. Some argue that these animals were widely used and integral to safety, while others suggest their use was sporadic and secondary to human vigilance. The risks of false alarms or missed warnings were high, making underground work perilous despite such precautions. An unexpected fact: in certain mining regions, miners used wet cloths or bundles of wet straw to cover their noses and mouths, attempting to filter the air. This primitive mask offered minimal protection, but showed an early awareness of airborne dangers. The absence of modern safety technology meant that many miners carried their fate in their own lungs and instincts. The flickering candle flame was both their guide and a constant hazard, threatening to ignite explosive gases while providing essential light. You can almost hear the whispered warnings passed down generations. Watch the flame, listen for the knocks, keep your eyes sharp. These were the rules of survival in a world where a single mistake could be fatal. Despite the grim circumstances, these detection practices demonstrate medieval miners' ingenuity and resilience. They adapted to their environment with limited knowledge and tools, balancing hope and fear in every breath. As you imagine a fragile mouse twitching in the gloom, or a damp cloth pressed against a miner's face, it becomes clear that medieval coal mining was as much a gamble with invisible forces as it was a physical struggle against rock and darkness. So, while canaries wouldn't join the underground chorus for centuries, the medieval miners' own small sentinels played a vital role in keeping these dangerous tunnels just barely survivable. You might assume that the men and children who risked life and limb in the mines were celebrated as heroes or respected craftsmen, but the reality was far less glamorous. Miners occupied a lower rung in the social hierarchy, essential, yet often marginalized, their grueling work shadowed by poverty and limited rights. The medieval social order was rigid, and miners were usually considered part of the laboring class, sometimes lumped with peasants or serfs. Their dangerous, dirty profession did not grant them much prestige. Despite supplying the fuel that powered cities' forges and armies, miners rarely reaped significant social benefits. They lived in modest, cramped quarters, struggled with health problems, and faced limited opportunities for advancement. This social status affected everything from wages to legal protections. Miners were often paid low wages relative to the risks they faced. Local lords or mine owners controlled the mines and dictated terms, leaving miners with little bargaining power. Attempts to form guilds or labor groups were rare and often suppressed, though there are scattered records of collective action and petitions for better conditions. Historians debate how much social mobility was possible for miners. Some argue that skilled miners or overseers could rise through experience and reputation, gaining some respect and better pay. Others maintain that social barriers were largely impermeable, especially for those born into mining families. The truth likely depended on location, time, and individual circumstances. An unexpected fact: in some mining regions, miners developed unique customs and even dialects, creating tight-knit communities that reinforced identity and pride despite social marginalization. These cultural traits helped bind miners together, offering solidarity in the face of hardship. The social stigma extended beyond economic status. Miners were sometimes viewed with suspicion or disdain by townsfolk and elites, seen as bearers of disease or bad luck, due to their close contact with coal dust and dangerous environments. This alienation added psychological strain to an already difficult existence. Yet, miners cultivated their own forms of respect and dignity underground and within their communities. Their work required skill, endurance, and knowledge, qualities that earned informal recognition among peers and some local authorities. Celebrations, patron saints, and rituals acknowledged the hazards and importance of mining life. Spending 24 hours in the mine means stepping into this complex social web where danger and necessity intersect with status and identity. You experience firsthand how miners balanced their critical role with societal limitations, crafting a life of resilience and quiet pride. So, beneath the surface of coal and rock lies not just a physical world, but a social one, where miners carved out space for themselves in medieval society, one difficult day at a time. As you imagine the glow of forge fires flickering in medieval smithies, it's easy to overlook coal's vital role in powering the weapons and armor that shaped countless battles. The coal extracted from these grim tunnels was the hidden fuel behind the clang of hammers on anvils. the heat that hardened swords, and the smoke that filled battlefields with gunpowder's precursor materials. Blacksmiths relied heavily on coal to achieve the intense temperatures needed for metalworking. Wood simply couldn't sustain the heat required for crafting durable weaponry and armor. Coal's abundance and energy density made it the preferred fuel, helping knights and soldiers equip themselves for war. The quality of a sword or a shield depended as much on the miner's toil as on the smith's skill. This connection between mining and warfare extended beyond tools to economics and politics. Control of coal-rich regions was strategic, with lords and kings competing to secure access to this resource. Coal mines were valuable assets, sometimes fortified or defended to ensure steady supplies. Without coal, the military power of medieval states could falter. Scholars debate how directly coal availability influenced medieval warfare. Some argue that coal's role was pivotal, enabling technological advancements in arms production. Others suggest that while important, coal was one factor among many, including manpower tactics and geography. Regardless, its contribution to the war effort was undeniable. A curious fact, some medieval armies reportedly stockpiled coal alongside weapons and provisions, recognizing its importance for campfires and blacksmithing. This logistical detail underscores how deeply coal was woven into the fabric of military life. Spending 24 hours in a coal mine, you gain new appreciation for the hidden link between miners' backbreaking labor and the clangor of battle. Every piece of armor gleams because of coal's heat. Every arrow shaft hardened in fire, fueled by black rock from these tunnels. The mine's darkness is not just physical, but symbolic, the unseen foundation of medieval power conflict and survival. You feel the stale air brush past your face, thick and barely moving. Ventilation underground was a puzzle medieval miners struggled to solve, a mystery with life or death consequences. Without fresh air, dangerous gases built up and oxygen levels dropped, turning the mine into a suffocating trap. Medieval mines relied mostly on natural ventilation. Multiple shafts were dug to encourage airflow, but these were often poorly planned or insufficient. Fires lit at shaft bottoms created drafts, but they also risked igniting flammable gases. Some mines had simple doors or traps to control air movement, but sophisticated ventilation systems were centuries away. Scholars debate how effective these early methods were. Some believe miners had practical knowledge of airflow, gained through experience, allowing them to avoid the worst dangers. Others argue that poor ventilation caused many accidents and health problems, with miners often working in near-stagnant air. An unexpected fact, in some cases animals like small dogs were used to detect changes in air quality. If they became restless or fainted, miners knew to evacuate. This practice echoed the later use of canaries, but was far less reliable. The psychological toll of poor ventilation was heavy. Breathing thick, foul air increased fatigue and anxiety. Your imagined 24 hours in the mine would be made even more grueling by the oppressive atmosphere pressing on lungs and spirit alike. Yet miners showed remarkable resilience, adapting to the mine's challenges with a mix of caution, superstition, and stubborn endurance. Their knowledge of ventilation was imperfect, but vital, saving lives in an unforgiving environment. So, as you breathe the stale air, remember that ventilation was not just a technical problem, but a human struggle, one that shaped every moment underground and the very survival of those who dared to work beneath the earth. You might not expect the medieval coal mine to be a place of culinary adventure, but miners developed their own peculiar eating habits shaped by their harsh environment. Food was simple, functional, and often eaten quickly during short breaks in the suffocating gloom. The typical miner's meal was salted pork or beef hard bread and sometimes cheese foods that kept well without refrigeration and provided needed calories. These rations were heavy, salty, and repetitive, far from gourmet, but essential for sustaining energy during long, grueling shifts. Imagine biting into a crusty, stale slice of bread, while your hands are black with coal dust, your lungs still gritty from the air. Miner's diet was surprisingly ritualized, too. Food and drink breaks were brief but important social moments. Eating together reinforced community bonds, and certain dishes or beverages became traditional favorites handed down through generations. Ale, or weak beer, was a common accompaniment, partly because it was safer than water in unsanitary conditions. Historians debate the nutritional adequacy of miners' diets. Some suggest miners suffered from deficiencies due to limited variety, which contributed to poor health and low resistance to illness. Others argue that the calorie-dense nature of their meals was sufficient for physical demands, though lacking in essential vitamins. A quirky fact, some mining villages were known for special miners' pies, dense meat pies, packed with preserved ingredients designed to be eaten quickly and provide sustained energy underground. These pies became a symbol of local identity and practical ingenuity. Food preparation was often communal. Families pooled resources, and local bakers or brewers catered to mining communities. Despite the harsh conditions, these culinary practices added flavor and comfort to otherwise grim days. The ritual of eating in the mine also had psychological effects. Sharing food in darkness amid danger fostered a sense of normalcy and hope, however fleeting. It was a brief respite from toil, a reminder of life beyond the tunnels. Spending 24 hours underground, you'd quickly learn to appreciate these small comforts. The simple act of eating became an anchor, sustaining not just body but spirit in an environment designed to wear you down. So, while the medieval miner's diet was far from fancy, it was a carefully balanced survival strategy, nourishing hard work, fostering community, and offering tiny moments of joy amid darkness. By now, you might be feeling the weight not just of the earth above, but of the mental strain pressing down in the mine's oppressive silence. Endurance underground isn't only about muscle. It's about the fragile limits of human psychology tested by darkness, isolation, and danger. Mining demanded relentless focus. The flickering rushlight, the rhythm of pick against coal, the persistent creaks and knocks all blended into a sensory stew that wore down nerves over time. You might find yourself jumping at shadows or hearing warnings in meaningless echoes. Claustrophobia, anxiety, and depression were silent companions to the physical hardships. Historical records reveal miners suffering not only from physical ailments, but mental exhaustion. Though medieval understanding of psychology was limited, some chroniclers noted signs of melancholy or fear among workers. Whether these were clinical conditions or natural responses to their brutal environment, they paint a picture of the mind under siege. The psychological toll was compounded by the ever-present threat of accidents, collapses, floods, explosions. Living with constant danger requires mental resilience, yet even the strongest wavered. Miners developed rituals, prayers, and superstitions not just to protect their bodies, but to guard their minds. A strange fact, miners sometimes carried small talismans or tokens, believing they offered mental protection. These objects provided a focus for hope and courage, intangible yet powerful shields against despair. Social bonds underground also played a crucial role in mental endurance. working shoulder to shoulder, sharing stories and supporting one another, created a fragile but vital sense of community. Humor and storytelling helped alleviate fear and monotony. Imagine spending 24 hours immersed in this environment where the physical and mental strains intertwine in a relentless dance. Maintaining focus and morale became acts of survival, as essential as wielding a pick or managing a flickering lamp. Ultimately, endurance underground was as much a battle of the mind as the body. The miners who survived did so through a combination of toughness, faith, camaraderie, and sheer stubbornness. So, as you sit in the imagined silence of the mine, feeling the weight of darkness pressing close, appreciate the remarkable mental resilience forged in these claustrophobic tunnels, an invisible strength that kept men going when the earth itself seemed ready to swallow them whole. You might think that surviving 24 hours in a medieval coal mine is just a test of physical stamina, but the truth is far more complicated. It's a battle against exhaustion, poison darkness, and a creeping mental fatigue that no amount of grit can fully overcome. Let's break down why burning out is almost inevitable. First, the physical toll, swinging a heavy pick in cramped quarters, inhaling coal dust, and dodging falling rocks is exhausting. The constant strain on muscles and joints wears you down relentlessly. The air is thin and toxic, flooding your lungs with dust and sulfurous gases. You breathe shallowly, each breath a compromise between oxygen and poison. Then comes the psychological assault. The oppressive darkness and isolation weigh heavily on your mind. Time blurs. Hours feel like days. The flickering rushlight barely keeps the blackness at bay, and every sound could be a warning or a trick of your senses. Anxiety and claustrophobia build quietly but inexorably. Nutrition is minimal, often just salted meat and hard bread eaten standing in the dust, offering little energy or comfort. Dehydration creeps in as water breaks are infrequent, and the damp, hot environment drains fluids rapidly. Fatigue and hunger combine, clouding judgment and reaction time. Despite folk remedies and rituals, the risks of collapse, flooding, and explosions loom constantly. Your nerves fray under the pressure. The superstition-fueled hope of knockers warning you of danger is a fragile comfort against very real threats. Historical records show that many miners simply didn't last a full day underground without rest or relief. Those who did were hardened veterans, often carrying the scars, both visible and invisible, of previous shifts. The idea of a fresh, energetic miner spending 24 continuous hours below ground is more myth than reality. An unexpected fact: in some mining regions, workers would pass out or collapse from sheer exhaustion underground, sometimes dying before they could be rescued. It's a stark reminder of how brutal these conditions truly were. So your imagined 24-hour stint ends not with triumphant survival, but with burnout, a comprehensive surrender of body and mind to the mine's relentless demands. It's a testament to the human cost behind every shovelful of coal. In the end, the medieval coal mine is not just a place of work, but a crucible testing the limits of endurance, hope, and sheer stubbornness. It's a world where burning out isn't failure, but an expected consequence of survival. After spending time in the dark, dusty world of a medieval coal mine, you have witnessed the brutal realities that miners faced every single day. From the dangerous, cramped tunnels carved by hand and hope to the choking air thick with sulfur and coal dust, the environment was relentless. The flickering light of rushlights barely held back the blackness, while the ever-present threat of collapses, flooding, and toxic gases shadowed every moment. We explored the tools, crude picks and shovels worn down by endless strikes, and the precarious balance miners maintained between seeking precious coal and risking death. You learned how long, exhausting shifts pushed the body and mind beyond limits, with children often sharing in this grueling labor. Superstitions like the knockers and rituals provided psychological armor, a way to cope with fears that no amount of science could fully explain at the time. The miners' simple diets, health hazards from coal dust, and the social marginalization they endured paint a vivid picture of resilience in the face of hardship. Beyond the mine, the coal-fueled medieval economies, war efforts, and burgeoning towns underscoring the miners' essential role despite their low status. Their communities bore the weight of environmental damage and poverty, but also nurtured unique cultures born from shared struggle. Ultimately, spending even 24 hours underground would burn you out, not just from physical exhaustion, but from the mental toll of isolation, danger, and deprivation. The medieval coal mine was more than a workplace. It was a crucible testing human endurance, spirit, and hope in one of history's harshest environments.